why did I leave Ofsted? Well, I guess it gets to a point in every job you do when you think that you've done all that you can do where you were. And certainly that's how I felt at Ofsted. I was there for, about 12, 13 years, something like that, and probably longer than anywhere I've worked before in my life. So it just felt right to do something different. So I've done all the things I thought I was ever going to do at Ofsted. And I had a number of different options open to me, and if I'm honest, the only one that felt like the right thing to do for me was to go back into schools and to go back to be a head, not least because there's a bit of me that always likes to do something that's new or different, and I didn't know of any, in fact I know of no other person who's worked for Ofsted in the kind of job that I've done before who'd gone back directly to work at the chalk face, so to speak. And I wanted to put my money really where my mouth was, because I spent the last 2 years going around telling everybody else how to run their schools, so I thought, well, I'd go and try and do it myself. So that's why I did that. A question here about, what's the best way to monitor the quality of teaching, and should schools remove the grades from individual lesson observations and all of that stuff? And how does that relate to performance-related pay? Well, I mean, it's a tricky one, isn't it? And I think probably my perspective on it is horses for courses. So I think there are some instances where you do want to pretty closely monitor the teaching that goes on, particularly say for somebody who's new to the profession or somebody who's struggling a bit. And I also think there are some schools that might need to adopt that kind of approach, whereby you do the 30-minute observation or whatever it is, you grade it, you feedback, and you do that kind of that activity. Don't pretend it's Ofsted though. Don't dress it up. Don't call it Mocksteds or any kind of nonsense like that. Just say what it is. It's about the head or senior leaders trying to get a handle with the middle leaders in the school, because they should be the ones that are really doing it. It seems to me, with the middle leaders, the senior leaders in school, getting a handle on how well things are going, using whatever criteria that you devise. And most people base those on broadly on the Ofsted criteria for what constitutes quality teaching. So I think that if a school's in special measures setting, when there's some real basics that need attending to, whether students or children are not, say in the secondary school, are not lining up to go, and not going into a classroom quietly, where it's taking 10, 15 minutes to settle the class, that kind of stuff, or where they don't routinely have equipment, or all the kinds of things. Or where there's a teacher struggling to do basic stuff like marking books, not obsessive like triple marking, but do the basic job of marking the books in the way that you want your own child's book to be marked, with a bit of care and a bit of insight, a bit of fondness, for the children. But if those sort of things are a problem for a teacher, then I actually think it's okay to do that, quite full, sit down, I'll watch you for half an hour, and let's see if you can do the basics. But that is all you're looking at. You are looking at basics, aren't you? You're not trying, and you should be, I think, trying to discover some kind of deep pedagogical kind of mystery, or to find out what kind of deep learning is going on. You're basically finding out if teachers are well organised, if they're sorting the classes out, if they're giving them the work that's hard enough, and so on, marking their books and all of those kind of basic things. So I think in those circumstances you do it. I think for teachers who can do that routinely, I don't actually think that me sitting in, for many teachers, for 20 minutes, half an hour, observing their lesson, is going to give me a full picture of their performance across the school. I know it isn't. I want to talk to the middle leader about their performance. I want to talk to them about what they enjoy about teaching. Some of the points that Hannah was making before. I want to talk about the kinds of things that they do outside of the classroom. I mean, how many teachers have you got in your schools, NQTs, for example, who don't take a club, or who don't want an activity, or who don't, take a team, or whatever it is? If you've got any, then that's too many, it seems to me. That's part of the whole business of culture of a school, part of the whole business of getting to know children, building relationships, going on ski trips, taking them to the zoo, or whatever it is. All that kind of stuff. Going above and beyond, actually, Going above and beyond the bare bones of the contract. That's what I want teachers to do. That's what I want as a parent. That's what children want. And that's what good teachers do. The job of heads, of course, is to make sure that they enable that to happen for teachers, and they create the conditions in which teachers can flourish and do all of those things, and they're not spending their lives running, as Harold was describing before, to the internet to print off some awful lesson plan. Similarly, it also means that heads shouldn't be giving teachers, I don't think, really complicated lesson forms to fill in that mean nothing, but simply get them to start to think about how should we teach, how can I teach the children to do or to know, or whatever it is, this particular thing. Now, that's not to say I don't believe in lesson planning, I do, just don't overcomplicate it would be my message in all of that. So I think you have to look at teacher performance in the round. You've got to look at what happens in the classroom, but look at their contribution more broadly. Is there a teacher in your school who doesn't do a voluntary duty, for example? If not, what's wrong with the culture in your school? Something is, it seems to be, and something needs to be done about it. And those teachers who step up to do those things, and those teachers who step up to do more than the basic job, seem to do the basic job well, are teachers who I think ought to be rewarded. But it is true, I'm afraid, that in too many schools, head teachers are not looking still, I don't think, governors are not looking still well enough at the performance of teachers in that kind of way. There are still schools, I know that Ofsted inspectors visit, and I know of them too, where teachers are routinely awarded pay rises and all of that stuff with terrible results. And there might be reasons for that, and it's important to understand those reasons, but for heaven's sakes, we ought to at least be having conversations with teachers about those results and why that's the case. We shouldn't be making the assumption that the teachers are doing all that they can. So I personally think performance-related pay and all the rest of it is not only inevitable, but it's got to be something that you have to welcome. There's no point hating it and being miserable about it. It's there, deal with it, embrace it, make it your own, make it work for you. So take a wide range of evidence would be my guess, and don't rely on little observations, and don't believe for a minute you're fooling anybody but yourself if you sit down and you do a 20-minute observation and you walk out of that classroom saying, that was a good 20-minute lesson, or that was good learning, or it's all hocus pocus. A lot of that stuff is my view. So take a rounded view of it, but where there are concerns about performance, then by all means you need to get in and do that kind of stuff, I think. Question about the consistency of inspections. Are all inspections consistent? No, and thank goodness they're not. One of the things that we all need to be really worried about is the introduction of a system that's based only and entirely on data, that doesn't take into account the particular context and the unique circumstances of each institution and the journey that they're on. And one of the things I often used to say to professional associations, but also to teachers and head teachers, is that look, if you look at the data alone, school X may look much better than school Y, but actually the difference is pretty marginal overall. And school X could be going that way, getting much better, and school Y could be diving down that way. And it's right that they get different inspection judgments. So it's important that they are context sensitive, and that they don't rely simply on an algorithm, in my view, because inspection, I believe, is not science. It's an art. It's an activity conducted between people, much as teaching is, and that's the bit you have to get right. If you get that bit right, and the relationship right between the inspectorate or the inspectors and the inspected, then you develop a greater sense of mutual trust, and these things work well, which is why I was banging on before about how you need to change inspection so that there's a cultural shift towards a better relationship, I believe, between inspectors and the inspected. So they're not all consistent in the way that people sometimes mean. Are they all fair is another question. Are all inspectors as good as one another? That's another question. And the answer to whether they're all fair or not is no, they're not. Not all inspections are fair. A very small proportion of inspections are not fair. They're rightly complained about, either because of an issue that's raised internally within Ofsted, or because a complaint is made externally. And then when that happens, sometimes a re-inspection occurs, and also sometimes grades change. And that causes Ofsted embarrassment. It does. But Ofsted is absolutely right, I believe, to stand up and take that embarrassment if it gets it wrong. At its height, we were doing about 8,000 school inspections a year, and we nearly always got it right. That's not bad, actually, out of 8,000. Of course, it's pretty miserable for the handful that we don't get it right for, didn't get it right for, but that's the price you pay for human-based activity, it seems to me. What did I think of Michael Gove? And who was the best education secretary I ever worked for? Well, the first thing is I never worked for an education secretary, right? So, you know, Ofsted is a non-ministerial department, independent, the chief inspector is independent, you know, and, you know, you'll have seen, those of you who are interested in it, about a year or so ago, over a year ago, some of the headlines in the Times and other newspapers between what appeared to be a row between Michael Gove and Michael Wiltshire and the DfE. I mean, Ofsted is absolutely not in the government's pocket, you know, and I wouldn't have worked for Ofsted if I wasn't allowed to be independent-minded. I mean, that's the whole point of HMI. So if you think that's the case, I promise you, you are absolutely wrong. But I know what the question means. Do you know what? It was probably him. You know, because this leads me on to what did I think of it. Because however the delivery of what he wanted to do played out, and I know that the way in which he was regarded by a number of teachers was, well, most teachers, was not at all positive. You know, I don't need you to tell me that. That actually he was, in lots of ways, a reforming Secretary of State. You might not agree with what he wanted to do. You might not agree with the way in which he thought the curriculum ought to be. You may not even have agreed with his values. But by heaven, at least he wanted to do something. That bit about him, I admired. I think what he got wrong, which is probably a mistake that everybody makes most days, is that you listen to the people who you trust, and those people are not always right. So I think there's something about that. And secondly, I think that it must be very, very easy, and it is very easy, I think, as a leader, to imagine that if you wish an idea one day, that suddenly everybody's going to buy into it, it's going to happen. And there's a great story about that. There was the guy who used to run Bernardo's, used to be, Nye's name was, he used to be a Director General at the Home Office. He was a prison governor. And when he was a Director General at the Home Office, and he told this story at a meeting I went to once, he was used to issuing a command, you know, in Whitehall, and then 5 minutes later, seeing it enacted on the cell blocks, corridors in Dartmoor, you know. So his word was law. He wanted something happening, bang, it happened. But education isn't like that. Social work isn't like that. And you know, the story he told, and I hope you get a sense of this, was that after he left that job and went to work for Bernardo's, when he thought he issued an instruction there, he found that actually what he was doing was proposing an idea that might well be worthy of some serious consideration and discussion, you know, and that's the mistake that people make, isn't it? And actually, I believe you've got to win people over a bit, you know. And if Michael Gove had been able to win over the teaching profession to his reforms, well, the rest would have been history, and we'd certainly be in a different place. But he just didn't do it. So I think there's a kind of a naivety about people who sit in Whitehall. If I think back to that Westminster Village, a kind of a self-obsession. You know, if they think that Twitter, you know, responds positively to their ideas, so flaming what? It doesn't actually mean very much in the back streets of Doncaster or at Armthorpe or anywhere else like that. And there's an error, I think, that people make in all of that. And you know, back to the point that's been made before by Howell about the traditional and the progressive. You know, I think the Conservative, the coalition government under Gove, the education bit of it, I think got too obsessed with all of that stuff. And I completely agree with Howell. It's not one thing or the other. You know, the people who claim that being traditionalist is the only way to teach, and all these progressives and these sort of mad, loon-eyed leftists, it's all tosh and nonsense. You know, the only mad people are the extremists, it seems to me, who sit at one end of either of those spectrum. For most people, doing a bit of everything is what works, and that's what teachers just get on with quietly. So, actually, I think he was a pretty good Secretary of State on one level because of his ambition and his desire to do stuff. But I think ultimately he failed to deliver on the promise that he himself held out for, is my is my view. And then who was the best chief inspector I ever worked for is the last question. And I mean, all three of the chief inspectors I've worked with have been fantastic. I mean, David Bell was the sort of guy, and still is, I'm sure, who made everybody feel they were special. And just a few months before I joined HMI, at some sort of meeting, and I went down because he was speaking at a conference when I was still ahead, and they were having cups of tea, and he was working the crowd. And I don't know if it's because he was well briefed, and there's a lot of that stuff that goes on, or not, but he'd certainly seen my name on a list. And he happened to alight on the group that I was stuck in, and he said, glad you're joining us, Mike, you know, and he knew who I was personally, you know, out of a sea of people. And you think, that's really classy. And he was really good at doing all of that. And he'd walk around that building in London, and people would think, I think overall, that they mattered, you know, that they really mattered to him, and that to me smacked of good leadership. Christine Gilbert was different too, very detailed, very focused, had a really broad political understanding of how things operate. And Michael Wilshaw is very much his own kind of man. But in terms of actually making things happen, wanting things to happen, and shaping the system up, I think out of all those three chief inspectors that I've ever worked for, Michael Wilshaw has probably got to be my man. You don't have to clap.